Hello and welcome to the Sally Paradise channel, where I talk about books and other things that I feel like talking about, because it is not about what you know, but how you feel about what you know. Today is episode 3 of the Beatnik 101 series, and I thought it was only right that we go into another one of the backstories from the original 4. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then I would recommend you go back and watch episodes 1 and 2 so that you can get all up to speed on the terminology and some of the other members. I'm really excited because we will be talking about the elusive, very mysterious, somewhat omnipresent figure in American literature, otherwise known as William S. Burroughs. And to understand him is to accept that you cannot understand him, and he really defines this idea of living many lives within one. So I think the only way to really tell a story like that is by doing so in a linear way, and I will be starting from the beginning. One of the fun things about the Beatnik generation is that they would write about each other, but they would use fake names, or rather character names. So Burroughs, very notably in Beatnik literature, had a trust fund which afforded him literally the financial means to sustain his life. Now, he got that trust fund from his grandfather, who invented the adding machine during the times. He did grow up somewhat wealthy, definitely more privileged than his other counterparts of the Beatnik generation, though he did say that it was more like living on the outskirts of wealth, that he had enough money to go to certain schools and be around the wealth, but never really fit into it. So this is sort of the beginning of the outsider attitude, kind of the rebellious nature of William S. Burroughs, and where it began. If you've read any Burroughs, then you probably already know that he was gay, and you would know this because some of his more popular works were referenced as homoerotic literature. This is important because as a child and for his most adult life, he was in the closet. Being a kid is already so tough, and then having to hide this really big part of you on top of that, and feeling like you're on the outskirts of wealth, again, this all just further disassociates him from this world that he grew up in. So we can really see that this rebellious nature is starting to bloom, but also this idea of living in his head. He was very interested in the mind, in the human body, and the limits and boundaries that it could go to. So obviously as a child, he wasn't necessarily on this journey yet, but we can see the first seeds being planted. Back to his schooling, he did grow up in this wealthy community, good schools, and then he did go on to not only attend, but to graduate Harvard. He was a very intelligent man, but he also had very strange interests, and that was exploring the depths and caverns of the mind. And he did so with drugs. A lot of drugs. A lot of drugs. And this was occurring before the Beatnik Big Boom, during the Beatnik Big Boom, and after the Beatnik Big Boom. And that occurred in 1944. If you've read episode 2, then you know that the Beatnik Big Boom was a murder at Columbia University and his group of friends, where he was found to be an accessory to the murder. Now, this incident will not be the last time that Burroughs is involved in a murder. In 1951, so not too long after, he accidentally murdered his wife, Joan Vollmer. She put an apple on top of her head and was asking him to shoot and aim at it. Now, this kind of behavior right there actually wasn't that strange for this couple. Burroughs loved guns, he loved drugs. They were an odd pair to begin with. She was said to have been a bit strange herself, somewhat depressed, but also a very intelligent woman. There's a lot of debate around this topic of whether he did it on purpose or not. He never actually said, but all that we know is that from this incident, Burroughs seemed to be absolved of his writer's block. He was always a writer. He wrote essays and short stories, but after this incident, he was able to write long-form books. He wrote Junkie, he wrote Queer, and then he went on to write dozens of other books. He's also very well known for using the cut-up method, which is basically a modge podge of excerpts and different parts of the book kind of thrown together, pieced together, and there's no rhyme or reason, there are no rules, and that in itself really speaks to the context of the literature, because it's very much this post-apocalyptic world that he's always talking about, where there are no rules, there are no morals, and everything is very senseless. And that in itself is Burroughs. He really believed that he saw the world for what it was, which was a senseless place that others tried to make sense of with laws and this kind of mythological moral code that everyone was supposed to follow. He was a man on a mission in terms of not adhering to that. So while his way of doing things wasn't necessarily all of the other beatniks' way of doing things, it did align ideologically with the rebellion against American ethics of this time. The beatnik generation, again, was rebellious, not in a violent way, but in a thoughtful way. And Burroughs was very much a part of that. In fact, his books actually went on to change the course of history because they were first banned, they were censored, and Allen Ginsberg, who we know is one of the original four, actually went to bat with Burroughs' publisher to the courts, and they won. Now, it doesn't just stop there with the beatnik generation with Burroughs and his kind of famous group of friends. He was very famously friends with Patti Smith, who is a writer today. He somewhat mentored her. She kind of references it as that. He heavily influenced David Bowie with his book Naked Lunch. He kind of hung around the Sex Pistols crowd. So he was very much in the punk era in New York City, which is so cool to think about because Burroughs himself was already a little bit older than his counterparts of the beatnik generation. So you have all these really cool photos from that time period of seeing Burroughs still just hanging with the cool kids and kind of seen as this grandfather of rebellion. He also didn't stop writing. He didn't stop making art. He very famously made art with guns and would kind of take on the Pollock method of splatter and chaos, which makes a lot of sense because his books were basically the same thing. Again, he was this man who lived a very full, layered, and interesting life. He later died in 1997, which is pretty funny because he actually outlived Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, who again, he was a little bit older then, but Burroughs was very bad to his body, did so many drugs that people thought he would probably die from that, but I believe he just died from old age, maybe he got sick, but he was pretty old when he went. That's a pretty rough outline of William S. Burroughs, but I also want to talk about who he was to the original four because, again, one of the things that I love about the beatnik generation is the friendship and the loyalty that the original four had with one another. He always spoke very highly of Jack Kerouac. There was this love and this camaraderie between them. And though Burroughs didn't necessarily label himself as a beatnik because of course he's this lone wolf, free bird character, he would never put a label on himself and he didn't necessarily like to be associated with anything. He gave full credit to Jack Kerouac as the true spark that set everything off, which I think is just a very kind, loving thing to do. And he always said that Jack Kerouac was too soft, and I think in saying that, he just wished that he could be a little bit stronger, a little bit tougher. And Kerouac, if you've seen episode 1, who was prone to depression, drinking, Burroughs definitely knew that. Now, his relationship with Allen Ginsberg was also very special. Allen Ginsberg basically acted as a literary agent and pushed Kerouac and Burroughs' work to publishers. So he found it home because he believed in it. And kind of fun, they actually dated for just a little bit. They were both gay, and I think that's just a fun piece of information because they probably got a little tipsy one night after knowing each other for a very long time and tried it out, saw how it worked. They were just, at the end of the day, normal people. I actually don't know that much about Burroughs' relationship with Lucien Carr. I can say that Burroughs was actually friends with David Cameron, who Lucien Carr murdered in the beatnik Big Boom moment. So I'm sure there was definitely some resentment there. I'm not sure that they were ever as close to one another the way that Burroughs and Kerouac were and Burroughs and Ginsberg were. If you have any information on that though, definitely let me know in the comments below. That's all I have for you today on William S. Burroughs, and I will leave you with some book recommendations. I would definitely start off with some of his first books, which were Junkie and Queer. I think it's important to start there because Burroughs has a very chaotic, specific type of writing. It's kind of tough to follow, but once you get into the rhythm of his writing and get an idea, it's easier to get through some of his other books. And once you've gotten through those, I would recommend moving on to Naked Lunch because it did influence a lot of people like David Bowie. So yeah, it's just a fun read and cool to see through that lens. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe. And if you have any suggestions or want to see a particular figure from the beatnik generation discussed, leave it in the comments below. I'm also always open to learning, so if you have any resources or books that you think I should check out, definitely drop them down there as well. I will see you for episode 4 very soon.